The smoke wasn't right. That was the first thing that hit him. Alonez pulled his Mustang, Cochin, to a stop on the high ridge, the wind carrying a scent that was all wrong for the Arizona territory. It wasn't the clean, honest smell of a brush fire sparked by lightning. This was greasy, vicious. It smelled of kerosene and secrets. Below him, the scrubland shimmered in the heat, but beyond the next rise, a column of ugly gray smoke clawed at the bright blue sky like a dying man's hand. He didn't want to go, not because he was afraid. Alon had walked through fields soaked in things far worse than fire. It was the knowing, a cold certainty that settled in his gut like a stone. Smoke like that was never an accident. It was a curtain, pulled across a stage to hide a crime. He nudged Kosham forward, the horse snorting, just as uneasy as he was. The trail down was a narrow, treacherous thing, lined with mesquite and barrel cactus that seemed to reach for him, to hold him back. But the buzzards circling low in the sky told him he was already too late. They dipped and soared with a lazy patience that spoke of a fresh kill. The land was telling a story, and Alon knew how to listen. 20 minutes later he saw it, the skeleton of a life, a small mining homestead, 3 cabins and a tool shed, all of it burned down to black, jagged teeth. A wagon was overturned, its wheels pointing to the sky in a final, silent plea. He swung off Cochin, his boots landing softly in the still warm ash. The silence was absolute, deafening. This wasn't a fire that had crept up on a sleeping family. This fire had a purpose. It had started from inside, exploding outward with a speed meant to erase everything. He walked the perimeter, his eyes missing nothing. No spent cartridges, no signs of a fight. Just emptiness, a void where a family used to be. It was too clean, too perfect, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Then he heard it, a cough, so small, so weak he almost missed it. It was a dry, rasping sound, like a tiny bird with a broken wing. It came from beneath the largest of the burned cabins. He moved without thinking, his boots kicking aside charred timbers and collapsed roof beams. The ground here was sunken, and he saw the warped iron hatch of a root cellar, its edges glowing faintly with trapped heat. He dropped to his knees, his bare hands grabbing the searing metal, and wrenched it open. And that's when he saw her. Inside, huddled in the dark, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4. Her face was a mess of soot and tear tracks, her hair a tangled mat of ash. In her arms she clutched a doll, or what was left of one. Its body was blackened, its button eyes melted into grotesque, staring beads. But the little girl wasn't crying. She just stared up at him, her eyes wide and gray, and as still as a frozen lake. She was like a cornered coyote, waiting to see if the wolf had come to finish the job. He held up his hands slowly. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe." She blinked once. Then, with a trembling that shook her entire body, she reached a tiny, soot-stained hand toward him. He wrapped her in his coat, lifting her out of the darkness. She weighed almost nothing. She didn't fight him, didn't make a sound. She just burrowed into his chest, her little hands grabbing a fistful of his shirt, and held on like he was the last solid thing on earth. As he mounted Cochin, cradling her in one arm, she buried her face in his neck. She was hiding from the world she'd just lost. They rode toward Broken Rock Canyon, Alon's hidden sanctuary, a place of red stone and silence, a place where men went when they wanted to disappear. But as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of fire and blood, Alon knew his days of disappearing were over. Someone had tried to burn this child out of existence. They had failed, and now they had him to deal with. By nightfall, the high desert wind turned cold. Alon built a small, smokeless fire in the mouth of his cave, a simple hollow in the sandstone he called home. He laid the girl on his own cot, a rough bed of sheepskin, and offered her a tin cup of water. She drank it in small, hesitant sips, her eyes never leaving his face. Then finally she spoke. Her voice was a tiny broken whisper, and she only said one word. "Clara." He nodded slowly. "Clara, is that your name?" She didn't answer. She just curled into a tight ball, pulling the scorched doll to her chest, her lips moving without a sound, whispering secrets to its melted face. He left her there and stepped out into the immense, star-dusted night. He knew what he had to do. Someone out there had lit the match. Someone thought they had gotten away with it. But fire leaves a trail, and smoke always, always leads back to the source. The next day, Clara didn't speak, or the day after that. She became his shadow, a tiny, silent ghost who followed him everywhere. When he mended a fence or cleaned his rifle, she would sit nearby, cross-legged in the dirt, just watching. Her gray eyes were like storm clouds that never broke. She never cried, not once. She just held on to that ruined doll like it was her only anchor in the world. The silence was heavier than the desert heat. It wasn't the silence of a shy child. It was the silence of someone who had seen the unspeakable, a grief so profound it had turned to stone inside her. He tried to care for her. He gave her dried meat and cornmeal mush, but she would only eat if he sat right beside her, watching over her. She wouldn't sleep inside the cave alone. She would only close her eyes if Koshan was tethered just outside the entrance. The big horse's steady breathing, a comforting rhythm in the dark. On the third night, with the sky on fire with the setting sun, Alon sat her down by the fire. He had to try something. The silence was breaking him. "My name is Alon Nez," he said, his voice quiet. "I used to ride with men who burn things. I'm not proud of it, but it's the truth." Clara didn't look at him. She just picked at a loose thread on her dress. He kept talking, more to the canyon than to her. "I left that life. Came out here hoping the ghost wouldn't follow." And that's when she looked up. Just for a second. A flicker of something in those stormy eyes. Then it was gone. That night a scream tore him from his sleep. He was on his feet in an instant, his revolver in his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. But the danger wasn't outside. It was inside. Clara was thrashing on her cot, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. She was trapped in a nightmare, reliving the fire. She whimpered, a sound of pure terror, and then she launched herself at him, clinging to him with a strength that was impossible for a child her size. He held her, his big arms wrapped around her trembling body until the shaking stopped. She never said a word, but she didn't let go. Not for the rest of the night. The next morning he knew he couldn't do this alone. He rode into Dry Cedar, a sad little town clinging to a dying well. He left Clara with Ruth Vega, the town's herb woman and midwife, a woman with kind eyes and hands that knew how to heal. Then he walked into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hale was a man who liked clean desks and easy answers. He looked up at Alon with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if it ain't the canyon ghost, what brings you out of your hole, Nez?" "Came to listen," Alon said, his voice flat, "about the fire up at the Mayfield camp." The sheriff shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Tragedy. Apache raid, most likely. Or rustlers. They're all gone, far as we know." Alon's jaw tightened. "Any survivors?" "None," the sheriff said a little too quickly. "But there's talk. A rumor about a little girl. Maybe someone slipped out." He leaned forward, his eyes suddenly sharp. "You hear anything, Nez?" Alon stared past him at a faded map of the territory hanging on the wall. "If I did," he said slowly, "I'd want to know who I was protecting her from." "You best be careful," the sheriff warned, his voice turning cold. "There are powerful men asking questions. Men with polished boots and letters from back east." Alon turned and walked out. He didn't like the sheriff's answers. He didn't like them at all. Back at Ruth's cabin, he found Clara outside, doing something strange. She was arranging small, smooth stones in a careful circle. 5 stones in a ring, with one in the center. She did it with a quiet, solemn focus. It wasn't play, it was a ritual. He squatted down beside her. "Where'd you learn to do that, little one?" She glanced up, then looked away. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, she said it's for when somebody dies." A chill went down Alon's spine. Those weren't just stones. They were Apache mourning signs. He'd seen them years ago, outside camps his own company had burned. A white woman from a mining family, teaching her daughter Apache customs? It didn't make any sense. "Who taught your mama that?" he asked gently. Clara shrugged. "A book. She said She said it wasn't right what happened to them. He stood up slowly, his mind racing. This wasn't just a random act of violence. There was something more going on here. Something deeper and darker. That night by the fire, Clara spoke again, unprompted. Her voice was flat, empty. "He had boots," she said, staring into the flames. "They didn't sound right. Not like Papa's." Elon went very still. "What do you mean?" "He walked quiet," she whispered, "on the wood floor. His spurs didn't jingle. They were soft." "Heavy black boots?" Elon asked, his throat tight. She nodded. "And a red scarf, but he didn't wear it on his neck. He tied it on his gun." Every muscle in Alon's body went rigid. That detail, that one tiny detail changed everything. Only one kind of man tied a colored scarf to his gun. A hired killer. A man who marked his weapon like a signature. Some of them used to be lawmen. Some of them still were, working for the highest bidder. "Did you see his face, Clara?" She shook her head. "His hat was low, but—" He smiled, right before he threw the lantern. A cold, murderous rage, the kind Alon hadn't felt in years, began to smolder deep inside him. He didn't ask her any more questions. He wouldn't make her relive the screams and the smoke. Instead, he just stirred the fire. "You don't have to talk about it anymore." She looked at him then, her gray eyes seeming to see right through him. "But if I forget," she asked, her voice trembling, "who will remember them?" He looked back at this tiny, impossible child who had survived hell. "I will," he said, "and you will, and that will be enough." Later, when she was finally asleep, he stared out at the indifferent stars. A man with soft boots, a red scarf on his gun, a smile before he burned a family alive. This wasn't an Apache raid. This wasn't rustlers. This was an execution, and they had left a witness. Alon Nez had a rule he'd lived by ever since he'd left his old life behind. If you light a fire to bury the truth, you better pray the wind never shifts. Because if it does, the smoke will always lead someone right back to you. And the wind was shifting. The desert was holding its breath. Elon rode north at dawn, back to the ashes. He'd left Clara with Ruth, hidden away in a root cellar, with enough supplies for 2 days and a shotgun Ruth knew how to use. Leaving her felt like cutting off a limb, but the questions churning in his gut were a fire he had to put out. The Mayfield homestead was even worse in the harsh light of day. A graveyard of a home. He dismounted and walked the perimeter again, his eyes scanning every inch of the scorched earth. This time, he saw it. Half buried in the sand, glinting in the sun, was a piece of metal no bigger than a dollar coin. He knelt and brushed away the ash. It was a horseshoe plate, but not just any plate. This was military-grade steel, heavy and thick, with a distinctive notch on the edge, the kind used by federal scouts or private security firms, the kind of men who rode expensive horses and carried expensive guns. Not the kind of thing a simple miner would ever use. He pocketed the plate and rode back to town, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He bypassed the sheriff's office and went straight to the livery stable, run by an old cavalryman named Weller Briggs. Weller had a bad leg and worse lungs, but his eyes were still sharp. He took the metal plate from Alon, turning it over in his gnarled hands. "Where'd you find this?" "Mayfield Place," Alon said. Weller squinted at the notch. "This here is Gallant and Boone issue. Private contractors. Hired guns mostly. They got an office down near Fort Craig." He looked up at Alon, his expression grim. "Heard they've been sniffing around silver claims? Funny how things have a way of burning down right before the land changes hands." The name echoed in the dusty air. Gallant and Boone. A name whispered in saloons, a name synonymous with ruthless efficiency. "You know any of their riders?" Elon asked. Weller's face went tight. "There's one man, Hollis Red, ex-federal marshal, a real quiet shooter, wears a red scarf tied to his gun hand, like a gambler's tell." The final piece clicked into place. The soft boots, the scarf, Hollis Red. Elon turned to leave, the name burning in his mind. That night, back in the safety of the canyon, he asked Clara one more question. "The man with the scarf," he began, his voice low, Did he smell like anything? Clara, who was braiding blades of grass into a long, intricate chain, went still. She nodded. He smelled like lemons and smoke. Alan felt the blood drain from his face. Lemon oil. The expensive stuff. Used to clean and polish high-caliber pistols. Not something a rancher or a prospector would ever carry. It was the mark of a professional, a man who took pride in the tools of his trade. Did he say anything, Clara? Anything at all? She hesitated, her little hands twisting the grass braid. Then so softly he could barely hear her, she said, "He told Papa, silver burns brightest when it's free." Then he laughed. And then he dropped the lantern. It wasn't just a threat. It was a slogan. Alon had seen it once, on a recruitment poster for Gallant and Boone, meant to sound patriotic and bold. But coming from the lips of a man holding a lantern over a terrified family, it was a death sentence. "Do you know why they wanted your home?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Papa said a man from a company wanted to buy our hill. Mama said mountains weren't for sale. That was it. That was all he needed. A family with a rich silver claim who refused to sell, a ruthless corporation that wouldn't take no for an answer, and a little girl who saw everything." The next morning, he packed his saddlebags. He was riding for Fort Craig. He was going to find Hollis Red. But as he looked at Clara, her small face so serious, tracing patterns in the dirt, he felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear. He was hunting a monster, but in doing so, he was leading the monster right back to the one person he was trying to protect. He had to draw him out, away from her. He rode into dry cedar and made a show of it. He bought a new survey map, letting it stick out of his saddlebag for everyone to see. He paid for his supplies with silver nuggets, hinting that he'd found a new strike up in the canyons. And in the saloon, he made sure a known gossip overheard him talking to Weller. "That Mayfield silver was just the tip of the iceberg," he said loudly. "The real vein is up in Broken Rock, and I'm the only one who knows where." It was a lie, a dangerous, stupid lie, but it was bait, and he prayed a man like Hollis Red was hungry enough to take it. That night, he didn't go back to his canyon. He circled around, hiding on a high bluff overlooking the trail. Just as he'd hoped, two riders peeled off from town, heading straight for Broken Rock. He didn't recognize them, but he recognized the way they rode, like predators. He waited until dawn before he returned to Ruth's. He found her on her porch, a shotgun resting across her lap, her face smudged with soot. "You better tell me that was part of your plan, Nez," she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. "I had to draw them out," he said, his eyes fixed on the root cellar door. "They came," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They came in the dark. I gave the tall one a face full of buckshot. The other one ran." She looked at him, her eyes burning. Clara, she didn't make a sound. She just stood in that cellar, with her back against the wall and waited. Ruth's voice broke. "That little girl has seen too much war, Alon." He nodded, his own throat tight. "I'm ending it." He turned to his horse. "I need one more day." "You're riding straight into hell," she warned. He swung into the saddle. He was riding for a place called Cross Rock Narrows, a maze of twisted red canyons where Apache warriors had once slaughtered an entire cavalry troop with nothing but rocks and courage. It was the perfect place for an ambush. He spent the day preparing. He rigged traps. A thin wire stretched low across the trail. Pits filled with sharpened stakes hidden under a thin layer of sand. Brush piles soaked in oil. By nightfall, he was perched high on a ledge, hidden in the shadows, his rifle resting on the cool stone. He was ready. And then they came. 3 of them this time. They moved slowly, cautiously, their hands never far from their guns. And the man in the lead, Alon felt his heart stop. Even in the gloom, he could see it. The confident posture, the glint of polished leather, and tied to his gun hand, a splash of crimson in the dying light. The red scarf. It was him, Hollis Red. The first rider hit the wire. His horse screamed and reared, throwing him headfirst into the rocks. The second rider panicked, pulling his horse back, right into the brush pile Alon had soaked in oil. Alon fired a single shot, not at the man, but at a piece of flint he'd placed near the brush. The spark was all it took. The world erupted in a wall of flame. The horses went wild, bolting into the darkness. Elon moved then, a silent shadow flowing down the rocks. He brought the butt of his rifle down on the second man's head as he tried to scramble away from the fire. And then there was only one. Hollis Red stood in the flickering firelight, his revolver drawn, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled canyon. "Alon Nez!" Red called out, his voice as smooth and cold as Riverstone. "I knew you'd come looking for me." Elon stepped out from behind a boulder, his own gun leveled. "You shouldn't have left a witness, Red." Red actually smiled, a thin, cruel curl of his lips. "The girl? She's a loose end. One I intend to tie up." He took a step forward. "You and me, Nez, we're not so different. We both know how to clean up a mess." "This isn't a mess," Alon said, his voice a low growl. "She's a child." "She's a liability," Red corrected, "and she's standing on a fortune. You ever try to get a silver claim through the courts? It's so much cleaner with fire. You burned a family for a piece of paper?" Red laughed, a short, ugly sound. "We go way back, you and I. I remember you from the Sand Creek days. You had a fire in your belly back then, too. What happened, Nez? You lose your nerve?" The memory hit Alon like a physical blow. The screams, the smell of burning lodges, his own hands stained with ash and blood. He had been a monster once, and this man, this ghost from his past, was trying to pull that monster back to the surface. "I'm not that man anymore." "Too bad," Red sneered. "He might have survived this." They fired at the same instant. The canyon exploded with sound. A bullet tore through the flesh of Alon's shoulder, spinning him around. His own shot hit Red in the thigh, dropping him to one knee. But it wasn't enough. Alon launched himself forward, tackling Red to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, a desperate, brutal tangle of fists and fury. The firelight danced around them, casting their shadows like warring demons on the canyon walls. Red was strong, a seasoned killer. But Alon was fighting for more than just his own life. He was fighting for Clara. He felt Red's hand go for the knife at his belt. Alon was faster. He drew his own blade and drove it home. Red shuddered, a choked gasp escaping his lips. He looked up at Alon, his eyes wide with surprise. "The land," he coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. "It's not the silver, it's what's under it." His eyes glazed over. He was gone. Alon knelt in the dirt, panting, his shoulder screaming in protest. The red scarf lay in the dust, already turning black with its owner's blood. He didn't bury the bodies. He left them for the buzzards. He rode back to Ruth's cabin, a ghost returning from his own war. Clara was standing outside waiting for him. She didn't run to him. She just watched as he slowly, painfully dismounted. She walked over, her small eyes taking in his torn shirt, the dark stain of blood on his shoulder. "You're hurt," she said, her voice impossibly small. "I'm fine," he managed to say. "It's over." She didn't ask what it was. She already knew. She just reached out and took his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his. Ruth appeared on the porch, her face a mask of worry. "There will be more of them," she warned. "A company like that doesn't just have one man. They have lawyers. They have money." Alan looked down at the little girl holding his hand, this small child who had faced down the very worst of men and had not broken. Then he looked at the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was pushing back the darkness. "Then I guess," he said, his voice filled with a new, hard resolve, "it's time we stop hiding." The next morning he packed everything he owned. It didn't take long. A rifle, a change of clothes, and the last of his silver. He lifted Clara onto Koshin's saddle and swung up behind her. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Tucson," he said. "We're going to see a judge." He was done running. He was done hiding. He was going to fight them with their own weapons, with the law. But as they rode east, with the rising sun at their back, a cold voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. Hollis Red's last words. "What's under the silver?" He had a terrible feeling that this fight was far from over. He was riding into the heart of the beast, with nothing but a little girl's testimony and a dead man's bloody scarf. The glow of Tucson on the horizon looked like a fresh fire. Alon rode into the sprawling, dusty city, feeling like a man walking into his own execution. Clara was quiet in front of him, wrapped in a blanket, her small hands clutching his belt. They found the courthouse, a grand brick building that seemed to sneer at the desert around it. The judge, Hiram Lowry, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from dried leather. Ruth had sent word ahead, along with a sworn statement and even a letter from Sheriff Hale, who seemed to have found a sliver of conscience. Lowry studied Clara, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "She's just a child," he said finally, his voice like gravel. "The law doesn't favor orphans, Nez, especially not with guardians of your reputation. You have no blood relation, no legal standing. What makes you think you can protect her?" Elon didn't waste words. He reached into his coat and pulled out the blood-stained red scarf. He laid it on the judge's polished desk. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Lowry stared at the scarf, then at Clara. She didn't look away. She met his gaze with that unnerving stillness of hers. "She watched him burn her family," Alon said, his voice low and steady. "And then she waited in the dark for someone to come back. I'm the one who came back." The judge let out a long, slow breath. "All right, Nez, I'll grant you temporary guardianship. But Gallant and Boone are a powerful company. They have friends in high places. You watch your back." There was no time for relief. That night at the boarding house, Elon stepped out for a moment to buy them some food. When he returned, the room was empty. The door was ajar, the lantern overturned on the floor, its light flickering weakly. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He checked the hallway, the stable, the alleyway. Nothing. She was gone. Then he saw it. A tiny tuft of stuffing from her doll, snagged on a nail in the back fence. And in the dirt below, the prints of heavy boots. 3 men. They hadn't just taken her. They had stolen the only thing that mattered in his world. He didn't wait for the sheriff. He didn't wait for the law. He strapped on his guns, his face a mask of cold fury. He followed the tracks out of the city, into the dark, unforgiving hills. The trail led him to an abandoned mission, Las Piedras Rotas, the broken stones. And there, in the crumbling courtyard, he saw them, 3 men around a campfire. And Clara, tied to a fence post, a gag stuffed in her mouth. Her eyes were wide in the firelight, and when they found him in the darkness, she didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She just gave a single tiny nod. "I knew you'd come." He circled them, a ghost in the sagebrush. He knew he only had one chance. He took the first man from behind, a silent blade in the dark. The second man heard the body fall and turned, just in time to catch 2 bullets in the chest. The third, a big, broad-shouldered man, roared in fury and started firing blindly into the night. Elon used the chaos, rolling from cover to cover, closing the distance. When the man's gun clicked empty, Allen was on him. They went down in a brutal crash of fists and desperation. "You're the half-breed," the man hissed, spitting blood. "The one who killed Red." Allen didn't answer. He hit him once, then twice until the man went limp. He scrambled over to Clara, cutting her ropes with his knife. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his shirt, her whole body trembling. "You came back," she whispered into his chest. "I told you I would," he said, holding her tight. They rode back into Tucson as the sun was rising. Judge Lowry was already at the courthouse, and his jaw dropped when he saw them, covered in dust and blood. "They took her," Elon said, his voice raw. "I took her back." Lowry didn't ask any questions. He just started writing. That afternoon, a federal marshal arrived from Phoenix. Gallant and Boone's Arizona charter had been suspended, pending a full investigation into the events at the Mayfield claim and the death of Hollis Red. It seemed the company had finally overplayed its hand. 2 days later, Elon and Clara stood before the judge again. This time, the papers he signed weren't for guardianship. They were for adoption. "Clara Mayfield," the judge read, his voice clear and strong, "is now legally Clara Nez." Clara looked up at Elon, her gray eyes shining. "Is that my name now?" He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "If you want it to be." She gave him a small, perfect smile, a smile that said a broken thing inside her had finally started to heal. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out the charred, ruined doll, and carefully, with a solemn look on her face, she took the red ribbon from her hair and tied it around the doll's arm. Not as a decoration, but as a promise, a memory. They had taken everything from her, but they couldn't take this. They couldn't take her story. But as they left the courthouse, hand in hand, Alon saw something that made his blood run cold. Across the street, standing in the shadows of an alleyway, was a man in a fine suit. He was watching them, and when their eyes met, the man gave a slow, deliberate nod, a look that wasn't a threat, but a promise. This wasn't over. Gallant and Boone weren't just a few thugs like Hollis Red. They were an army of lawyers and politicians. He had won the battle, but the war for Clara's future had just begun, and they were standing right in the middle of the battlefield. The man in the suit was named Mr. Corbin. He didn't carry a gun. His weapons were contracts and injunctions, and he began his assault the very next day. A notice was posted on the courthouse door. The adoption of Clara Mayfield was being contested by the Galan and Boone Corporation, acting as executors of the Mayfield estate. They claimed Alon Nez was an unstable and violent vagrant, unfit to be a guardian. They claimed Clara was a key witness in a corporate dispute and needed to be in their protective custody. It was a lie wrapped in legal jargon, a kidnapping sanctioned by a piece of paper. Judge Lowry called Alon into his chambers. "They're trying to bury us in paperwork, Nez," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "They have deep pockets. They can drag this out for years. And in the meantime, they can file motion after motion to have Clara taken from you." "So we fight," Alon said. "With what?" the judge shot back. "Your gun? Their army is bigger. We need more than a dead man's scarf. We need proof, something undeniable that links the company itself, not just Hollis Red, to the fire." Alon thought of Red's last words. "It's what's under the silver." It had to mean something. That night, with Clara asleep in their small room, Alon took out the charred doll. He'd kept it, thinking it was her last link to her mother. Now he looked at it with new eyes. He felt its strange, lumpy stuffing. With his knife, he carefully slit a seam in its back. And inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, folded document. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a map. It was a geological survey, but with handwritten notes crammed in the margins. It was a list of names, dates, and figures. It was a ledger, a record of bribes paid by Gallant and Boone to railroad officials, land surveyors, and even lawmen, including a recurring payment to Sheriff Hale. Clara's father hadn't just been sitting on a silver claim. He'd been documenting a massive conspiracy to steal land all across the territory, and he'd hidden the proof in his daughter's toy. Suddenly, the Apache warning signs made sense. Clara's mother hadn't just read a book. Maybe she was part Apache herself. Maybe the land wasn't just valuable for its silver, but sacred. This wasn't just about corporate greed anymore. It was about something much older and much deeper. The next morning, Alon didn't go to the courthouse. He took the ledger and wrote for the territorial newspaper, the Arizona Sentinel. He laid out the whole story for a young, ambitious reporter named Samuel Jones. The reporter's eyes went wide as he saw the names in the ledger. "This is dynamite, Mr. Nez. This could bring down the whole territorial government." "Just print it," Alon said. The story exploded. Gallant and Boone were exposed. Sheriff Hale was arrested. The railroad was implicated, but it also made Alon and Clara the most visible targets in Arizona. Corbin and his men couldn't touch them legally anymore, not with public opinion turned so fiercely against them. So they decided to stop playing by the rules. Alon knew they were being watched. He saw the same faces in the street, the same men lingering near their boarding house. He was trapped. He couldn't stay in Tucson, but he couldn't run. Running would look like guilt. Then a message arrived, delivered by a street urchin. It was a single sentence. "Las Piedras Rotas. Midnight. Come alone, or the girl disappears for good." It was a trap. He knew it was a trap, but it was one he had to walk into. He left a note for Judge Lowry and the reporter, telling them where he was going. He tucked Clara into bed, kissing her forehead. "I have to go out for a while," he whispered. "You be brave for me." She just looked at him, her eyes old and knowing. "You always come back," she said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. He rode out to the broken stones. the mission a dark silhouette against a sky full of cold, distant stars. He found Corbin waiting for him in the ruined chapel, flanked by four of the biggest, meanest-looking men Alon had ever seen. "Mr. Nez," Corbin said with a thin smile, "I'm so glad you could make it. You have something that belongs to my employers." "It belongs in a federal court," Alon said. "That's one option," Corbin agreed. "But I have a simpler one. You give me the original ledger, and you and the girl ride north, disappear, and in return, I'll let you live." "And if I don't," Corbin sighed, "then you die here. And the girl, well, orphanages are such sad places. Things happen." It was the moment Alon had been waiting for, the moment Corbin admitted his intent to harm Clara. And he wasn't the only one who heard it. From the shadows of the crumbling bell tower, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked echoed through the chapel. "That's enough, Mr. Corbin," said the voice of a U.S. Marshal, stepping into the moonlight, flanked by 6 armed deputies. "You and your men are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and attempted murder." Corbin's face went white. His men reached for their guns, but they were hopelessly outgunned. The fight was over before it began. As the marshals led Corbin and his men away in chains, Alon looked up at the bell tower. Sam Jones, the reporter, stood there, holding a notepad. He had followed Alon, bringing the law with him. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came in the form of a man with a pen instead of a gun. The next week, the adoption was finalized. There were no more contests, no more threats. Gallant and Boone's empire had crumbled to dust. As they rode out of Tucson, leaving the city and its ghosts behind them, Clara turned to him. "Where are we going now, Papa?" Alan looked toward the red cliffs of Broken Rock Canyon, shimmering in the distance. "We're going home," he said. The rains came that year, washing the ash from the canyons and bringing the desert back to life. Elon built them a small, sturdy adobe house, its back pressed against the warm stone of the canyon wall. It wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was a home. Clara blossomed. The silence that had clung to her for so long was replaced by laughter. She chased lizards through the sagebrush and told long, rambling stories to Koshin, who followed her everywhere like a massive, devoted dog. She went to school in Dry Cedar twice a week, where she quickly earned a reputation for her sharp questions and her fierce loyalty to her friends. Ruth Vega took to calling her the Firebrand, a nickname Clara wore with pride. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The scars on Alon's body began to fade, and the ghosts in his mind grew quiet. He still sharpened his knife by the fire at night, but it was more out of habit than necessity. The word Papa, once so foreign to him, now felt as natural as his own name. It was an anchor, holding him to this new, unexpected life. One afternoon, he took Clara to a high, flat rock face deep in the canyon. He gave her a hammer and chisel. "We're going to carve our story," he said. They worked all day, taking turns, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. By the time the sun began to set, it was finished. 2 names carved deep into the stone. Alon Nez, the one who came back. Clara Nez, the daughter of fire and stone. They stood back, looking at their work. "Do you think anyone will ever see it?" Clara asked. "Maybe," Alon said. "But that's not why we did it." "We did it so we'll remember," she said, her voice full of certainty. Then she took the chisel, and in small, wobbly letters at the bottom, she carefully carved 3 more words. "We are home." They rode back to their little adobe house as the stars began to appear. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she whispered, "I used to dream about the fire. Now I dream about the horses." He smiled, kissing her forehead. "Good dreams are the best dreams." As he turned to leave, her small voice stopped him. "Papa?" "Yes, little one? I love you." He stood there for a long moment, the simple words hitting him with the force of a physical blow, healing a part of him he thought had died long ago. He turned back, his own voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, Clara. Always." He stepped outside into the cool desert night, looking up at the vast, star-filled sky. He was no longer a ghost hiding in the canyons. He was a father. He was home, and that was a story worth fighting for. Thank you for staying with me through Alon and Clara's incredible journey. Their story is a powerful reminder that even after the most devastating fires, new life can grow, and that family isn't just about the blood you share, but the people you fight for. If their story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what allows me to keep finding and sharing stories that matter. I'll see you in the next one.